Welcome to the deep dive. We're all about helping you navigate this pretty complex world of AWS.
Mm-hmm.
And today we are going deep on Amazon EventBridge.
Okay.
This is a service that, you hear about it,
Yeah.
but we really want to go beyond those basics
Right.
into the stuff that really matters for senior engineers and architects,
Absolutely.
the folks listening to this show.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about sophisticated event routing, real-time data processing, building systems that are both agile and resilient.
Right.
But before we get into all that, let's just take a step back for a sec.
Okay.
What exactly is EventBridge?
So EventBridge is a serverless event bus service. And I like to think of it as the central nervous system of your application, right?
Yeah.
It allows different parts of your application to communicate with one another through events without having to be directly coupled to one another.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So it lets you react to changes in your system in real time, whether those changes are happening within your AWS environment, from SaaS applications or even custom applications that you've built yourself.
So we're talking about, like, instead of having to build all these tightly integrated systems where if something changes in one place, it breaks everything else,
Exactly.
we're now building something that's more like a network.
Yeah, more like a network of independent but interconnected components.
Okay.
And that's really where the power of EventBridge shines. It allows you to build systems that are not only more agile, they're also more reliable and they're more scalable. And the reason they're more reliable is that if one component fails, it doesn't bring down the whole system. And in terms of scalability, you can scale individual components as needed without having to over-provision resources.
So I've heard about these terms.
Yeah.
Event buses, EventBridge pipes.
Yeah.
What is the difference?
Mm-hmm.
And which one should I be using?
Right. That's a great question. So think of event buses as the main hub for event routing. Okay. You have your default event bus, which handles all the events that originate from within your AWS account. You have custom event buses, which give you a little more control. You can do things like tailor them to specific applications or even route events across different accounts. And then you have partner event buses, which are specifically for integrating with SaaS applications.
So it's almost like choosing the right transport network
Yeah,
for your event.
exactly.
Like if it's all internal, the default bus is fine.
Right.
But if you're starting to deal with other departments or external partners, you might need to go for a custom or partner bus.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. Now, EventBridge pipes are a little bit different. They're designed for more targeted point-to-point integrations. So let's say you have an event from one service that needs to trigger an action in a completely different service. A pipe allows you to filter, enrich, or even transform that event before it reaches its destination.
So I'm thinking, like, maybe I'm working with some legacy system that spits out data in this crazy format.
Right.
And I need it to be able to talk to my more modern applications.
Right, exactly. You don't want to have to write custom code to handle that translation.
Right.
You can use a pipe to do that for you.
So the pipe's like our translator.
Exactly. And it just makes your event-driven architectures much cleaner and easier to manage.
Cool. So events themselves,
Yeah.
what are they? Like, what makes them so special in this architecture?
Events are really the heart of everything, right? They're essentially JSON objects that represent a change or an occurrence in your system. So this could be something like a new user signs up, an order gets placed, a file gets uploaded to S3, anything like that.
Okay.
The important thing is these events are structured. So they contain all the information you need about what just happened.
So instead of having to constantly go out and ask all these services what's new,
Right.
our applications are now just listening for these events.
Exactly. Exactly. Your applications are listening for events and reacting to them. And that makes the system more efficient and responsive because you're not constantly polling for updates.
Got it. So now I'm thinking about the brains of the operation.
Yeah.
How does EventBridge know which events should go where
Right.
and what actions to trigger?
That's where rules come in. So rules are essentially the logic that defines how your events are processed.
Okay.
You can create rules that filter events based on specific criteria. It could be the source of the event, the type of the event, even the content of the event itself. And when an event matches a rule, you can specify the action that you want to take.
Okay.
So maybe you want to trigger a Lambda function, send a message to an SNS topic, or even invoke an external API.
So if we think about the event bus like this giant switchboard, events are coming in from everywhere.
Right.
The rules are what's directing them to the right place.
Exactly, exactly. That's a great way to think about it. And this is where the power and flexibility of EventBridge really shine because you can create incredibly granular rules to make sure that only the most relevant events are triggering your actions.
Okay, so we've got our event buses, we've got our events flowing through them, we've got our rules kind of directing traffic.
Right.
What are the endpoints? Where do these events ultimately end up?
The destinations for your events are called targets.
Okay,
And the range of potential targets is incredibly broad. We're talking about AWS services like Lambda functions, SQS queues, Kinesis streams, SRS topics. You can even trigger step functions workflows, update DynamoDB tables, or interact with external systems through API destinations.
so it's not just about staying within AWS.
No, not at all.
I could have an event from my AWS environment trigger an action in like my CRM
Right, exactly.
or updates the marketing automation platform.
Exactly. And that's what makes EventBridge so powerful because you can build these integrated event-driven architectures that span multiple systems and platforms.
Cool. So how are we getting these events into EventBridge in the first place?
Right.
What are the sources that we can tap into?
So event sources are diverse and they're constantly expanding. You have tons of AWS services that natively emit events. These cover everything from compute, storage, databases, analytics, you name it. You can also configure your own applications to push events using the AWS SDKs. And even API calls can be configured to trigger events.
So I'm not just limited to reacting to events. I
So
can actually create my own events based on something I do.
exactly. You can generate your own events based on custom logic or actions within your applications, and that opens up a whole world of possibilities for building dynamic responsive systems. So your applications can talk to each other through events, they can trigger actions in external systems, they can even kick off automated workflows.
It's all starting to paint a pretty powerful picture,
Yeah,
but I feel like we're just getting started here.
we are. We're just scratching the surface.
There's a lot more to EventBridge, especially when we start diving into some of those advanced features.
Yeah. Right.
That's what really unlocks its full potential.
Right. And that's what we're going to be doing in the next part of the show.
Okay, sounds good. So what's coming up next?
So in the next part, we're going to explore some of those more advanced capabilities of EventBridge, like input transformation, archiving and replaying events, global endpoints, and schema management.
Cool. So these are the features that really let us fine-tune our event processing
Mm-hmm.
and build systems that are as resilient as they are flexible.
Right.
Sounds good. I'm ready to unlock the true potential of event-driven architectures.
Me too.
See you in part 2.
See you there.
Welcome back. Last part, we just scratched the surface of Amazon EventBridge's capabilities.
Yeah, we did.
Now we're going to dive into those advanced features that make it so powerful for, senior engineers and architects like you guys listening.
Absolutely.
So what's first on the list?
So let's talk about input transformation. It's one of those features that might seem a little minor at first, but it can really save you a lot of headaches when you're integrating different systems.
I'm listening. What's so special about it?
So input transformation gives you the power to actually reshape the event data before it reaches the target.
Okay.
We all know how frustrating it can be when you have one system that spits out data in one format and another system expects it in a totally different format.
Yep.
Instead of writing custom code to do that translation, you can use EventBridge to do it for you.
So it's like having a universal translator for our events.
Exactly. You can use these simple JSON path expressions to define how you want to map fields, rename things, extract specific pieces of data. It just makes integrating with systems that have different data expectations so much easier.
That's pretty handy,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with like legacy systems
Right.
or third-party APIs that just have their own way of doing things.
Exactly. And speaking of dealing with different scenarios, let's move on to archiving and replaying events. This is a feature that's incredibly powerful for testing, debugging, even auditing.
Archiving and replaying events. That sounds like it could be useful for a lot of stuff.
It really is. Imagine you're rolling out a new feature or you're making changes to your event processing logic. Wouldn't it be great if you could test those changes against real-world events without actually affecting your life system?
That would definitely make things easier.
That's exactly what EventBridge lets you do.
Okay.
You can archive your events for a certain period of time and then replay them later. This could be for testing new code, validating functionality, even just investigating past issues.
So we can essentially create like a sandbox environment with real event data.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And because those events are immutable, you know that you're testing against the exact same data that was processed originally.
This sounds like a must-have for any, mission-critical system
It really is.
where you just have to make sure things are working.
It's a great tool to make sure your system is behaving as expected under all kinds of conditions. And speaking of mission-critical systems, let's move on to a feature that's all about resilience. Global endpoints.
Global endpoints. Intriguing. What are those all about?
So global endpoints provide regional fault tolerance for your event-driven architectures. In a nutshell, it means you can replicate your event buses across multiple regions.
Okay.
So if one region goes down, your event processing can seamlessly fail over to another region.
So it's like having a backup generator for our events.
Yeah,
They just keep flowing.
exactly. And the best part is it's all managed by EventBridge. You don't have to set up complex replication. You don't have to worry about failing over manually. It just happens automatically.
That's the kind of peace of mind we need when we're building systems that have to be available all the time.
Absolutely. And you can actually enable event replication, which means that all of your custom events are copied to both your primary region and your secondary region.
Yeah.
So even if your primary region goes down, you haven't lost any critical event data.
So we have regional fault tolerance and data protection.
That's right.
Awesome. So let's move on to a feature that's all about order and consistency. Schema management.
Okay.
It may not sound as exciting as global failover,
Right.
but it's just as critical,
It is.
especially when you have multiple teams working together.
Yeah, absolutely. So imagine you have, let's say, dozens of teams, each building their own services and emitting events. Without some kind of consistent way to define and manage those events, things can get really messy really fast.
Oh, yeah. Data inconsistencies.
Mm.
Integrations become nightmares.
Absolutely. And that's where the schema registry comes in. Think of it as a central repository for defining and managing the structure of your events. It's like having a blueprint library that makes sure everyone is speaking the same language.
So we can define schemas for our events.
Right.
And then anyone who wants to work with those events knows exactly what they look like.
Exactly. And this has a ton of benefits. It simplifies integration, it reduces errors, and it even allows for automatic generation of code bindings.
Code bindings. Tell me more about that.
So imagine you have this really complex event, lots of nested data structures. Instead of manually parsing all that JSON in your code, you can use schema-based code bindings to generate predefined code libraries that handle all of that for you.
So schema management is all about bringing order to our event-driven world.
Exactly. And it goes even further than that. The schema registry actually allows you to discover and explore schemas for AWS service events. You can even share your own schemas with other people.
So it's like a marketplace for event structure.
It is. It fosters collaboration and reusability.
I like it. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of working with events.
Exactly. Now, we've covered a lot of ground here. Transforming event data, replaying events, regional fault tolerance, managing schemas. But before we move on, I want to touch on one crucial aspect that underpins all of this. Security.
Okay, security. That's important.
Yeah.
What do we need to know about keeping our EventBridge systems secure?
So security is absolutely paramount in any event-driven architecture.
Right.
And EventBridge gives you the tools and controls you need to protect your event data and make sure that only authorized entities have access.
So it's not just about the events themselves.
No,
It's the whole infrastructure around them.
it's the whole thing. So EventBridge integrates with AWS IAM. So you can define granular permissions for who can create, manage, and interact with your EventBridge resources.
So we can apply that principle of least privilege.
Right, exactly. Only those who need access have it.
Got it.
And to protect the data itself, you can use AWS KMS to encrypt your events both at rest and in transit. So even if someone manages to intercept that data, they can't read it.
So we have IAM for access control,
Right.
KMS for encryption.
Yep. That's a pretty solid foundation.
Sounds like it.
And speaking of foundations, let's not forget about monitoring and debugging. Even with the best security, things can still go wrong. So we need to be prepared to diagnose and resolve issues quickly.
Makes sense. What tools do we have for that?
So in the next part, we'll dive into that world of debugging and troubleshooting. We'll cover common pitfalls, explore monitoring techniques, and give you the knowledge to tackle those challenges that inevitably come up.
Okay. I'm ready to become an EventBridge debugging master.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Welcome back to the deep dive for the final part of our exploration of Amazon EventBridge.
Yeah.
We've gone through the basics.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone through some of the more advanced features.
Right.
But now I really want to shift gears and talk about, what this means in practice.
Okay. Yeah.
Like, where does EventBridge really shine in the real world?
So one area where EventBridge really excels is in building these real-time data pipelines.
Okay.
Imagine you've got data streaming in from all these different sources.
Right.
It could be IoT devices, social media feeds, financial market data, anything like that.
Right.
Instead of building these complex batch processing systems,
Right.
EventBridge can actually handle that data in real time as it arrives.
So we're talking about like reacting to these events
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah, instead of waiting for some scheduled process to kick in, you're reacting to events as they happen.
Got it.
So with EventBridge, you can ingest those data streams, you can filter and enrich the data on the fly, and then you can route it to the appropriate destination.
Okay.
Maybe it's a data lake for storage,
Mhm.
maybe it's an analytics engine for processing, or maybe it's a notification system to alert users.
So we're not just collecting the data.
Right.
We're actually getting insights from it and taking action in real time.
Exactly. And the beauty of it is EventBridge has all these pre-built integrations
Okay.
with a bunch of different data sources and targets, which means you can build these sophisticated data pipelines without writing a ton of custom code.
That's pretty powerful. But it sounds like we're just scratching the surface here.
Yeah. Another area where EventBridge is a real game changer is in application integration.
Okay.
So it can act as the glue between different applications, even those that live outside of AWS.
Okay.
So you can use EventBridge to orchestrate interactions between these applications, make sure they can communicate with each other, share data, all of that.
So instead of having to build like point-to-point integrations
Yeah.
between all my different applications,
Right.
I can just use EventBridge as this central hub.
Exactly. Think of it like this. A new customer signs up on your website.
Okay.
That event can trigger a whole bunch of actions.
Okay.
Update your CRM system,
Hmm.
send a welcome email, initiate some personalized onboarding process.
Right.
All of that can be orchestrated through EventBridge without your applications having to be directly aware of each other.
So much more flexible than those old school ways of doing integration.
Much more flexible, much easier to maintain. And it also makes it easier to add new integrations down the road.
Okay.
Because you're not stuck rewriting a bunch of code, you just define the events and the rules, and EventBridge takes care of the rest.
Cool.
Mm.
So we've talked about data pipelines.
Yeah.
We've talked about application integration.
Mm-hmm.
What about like really complex scenarios?
Yeah.
Can EventBridge handle those?
Absolutely. EventBridge is definitely robust enough to support some of the more complex architectural patterns out there. Things like the Saga pattern,
Okay.
which is often used to manage long-running transactions that involve multiple steps across multiple services.
Okay.
And you can use EventBridge to model each step as an event, make sure everything happens in the right order, make sure any failures are handled gracefully.
So like a project manager for distributed transactions.
Exactly. And that ability to model these complex workflows using events is one of the reasons EventBridge is such a good fit for things like microservices architectures.
Microservices. That's a hot topic.
It is.
So how does EventBridge fit in there?
So in a microservices world, you're breaking your application down into all these small independent services, right?
Right.
EventBridge gives you a platform for those services to communicate and interact with each other without being tightly coupled.
So my microservices can publish events,
Yeah.
subscribe to events, and essentially work together without even knowing about each other.
Exactly. And you've got all the tools you need to manage that communication. Make sure the events are going to the right place, make sure they're processed efficiently.
Cool. Well, this has been a super insightful journey
Yeah, it has.
into the world of Amazon EventBridge.
Absolutely.
We've covered a ton of ground here, from the basics to some of those more advanced features to some real-world examples.
Yep.
As we wrap up, is there anything that, senior engineers, architects should keep in mind as they start to explore EventBridge?
So I think the biggest thing to remember is that EventBridge represents kind of a paradigm shift in how we build systems. It's not just about adopting a new technology.
Right.
It's about embracing this whole event-driven mindset.
So it's a different way of thinking.
It is. It's a different way of thinking about how our systems work, how the information flows through those systems.
Got it.
So as you start to dive into EventBridge, I really encourage you to embrace that new way of thinking. Start thinking about how you can use events to build systems that are more responsive, more resilient, more scalable. The possibilities are pretty much limitless.
Great advice. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Amazon We hope you learned a lot and are excited to get started with event-driven architectures.
Yeah. It's been great sharing our knowledge and experience with you. And remember, this is just the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
The world of event-driven architectures is constantly evolving.
Right.
There's always something new to learn, something new to explore. So keep experimenting, keep learning, and keep building amazing things with Amazon EventBridge.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone.